and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining our session today called Progressive Delivery, Mastering Safe and Intentional Software Releases, brought to you by Harness and D-Zone. My name is Katie Bavoso, and I will be your host today. Today, we'll focus on guiding engineering teams to confidently release new software through a combination of controlled canary deployments and feature flags. Helping me send this canary into the coal mine today are two members of the Harness team, Joshua Klein, Senior Implementation Architect, and Dewan Ahmed, Principal Developer Advocate. A quick note before we get started, you can feel free to use the chat feature to comment on the presentation. We'll be having a Q&A at the end of the session today. So if you have any questions, please feel free to pop them in there as they come up, and we'll be sure to include them in that Q&A following the presentation. Now, please join me in welcoming Josh and Dewan. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hi, everyone. Greetings. My name is Josh Klein, as mentioned, Senior Implementation Architect at Harness, and I'm here today with Dewan. So, Dewan, please introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, thanks, Joshua. Dewan Ahmed, based in the beautiful east coast of Canada, New Brunswick. I work as a Principal Developer Advocate at Harness, and with me, I have two Captain Canary to help us throughout the webinar. So they'll be our support people for any questions or any support. So we have the Q&A feature as well as the chat. So we'd really love your engagement and questions throughout the presentation. All right, so progressive delivery, mastering safe and intentional software release. So let's get started. Canary deployments and feature flag. So before we actually start the webinar, let's rewind back to February 28, 2017. The day parts of the internet went dark, and AWS S3 in the US East 1 region suffered a massive outage that lasted around 4 hours. The root cause? A single mistyped command during a routine debugging task in the S3's billing system. It accidentally removed a chunk of the internet. Sounds simple to recover, right? But the fallout wasn't. S3 is a foundational building block. Everything from websites to APIs, CI pipelines, even IoT devices relied on it. Thousands of devices, services, including big names like Slack and Trello, went offline or were severely impacted. Even AWS's own status dashboard failed because its graphs were stored in S3. This outage then became a textbook example of cloud dependency chain failure. And more importantly, how a small human mistake in a monolithic deployment model can ripple across the globe. It shows us why resilience, isolation, and control in deployments matter. That's why progressive delivery and canary deployments in particular are so critical today. They help ensure that one faulty change does not instantly cascade across your entire infrastructure. But before we dive into solution, let's talk about what hurts. Now, traditional deployments are still mostly all or nothing. You flip the switch and every user gets the new version all at once. That's a huge blast radius. Even worse, when something goes wrong, figuring out what went wrong is painful. No visibility into which feature triggered the issue. And what if we do find the culprit? Rolling back is often manual and time-consuming. And then add to the chaos of coordinating features across teams, especially in microservices land. All of these leads to what I call the release anxiety paralysis. Engineering teams end up delaying releases out of fear, which kills innovation and velocity. So what's the fix? Canary deployments. Think of it like releasing your code to a small test audience before hitting the main stage. We start by sending a tiny percentage of real traffic, say 2% or 10%, to the new version in production. We monitor key metrics, latency, error rate, infrastructure health, If everything looks good, we gradually ramp up the traffic. It's infrastructure level control with real-time safety checks. If things go south, rollback is fast and low risk because only a sliver of users was affected. It's a deploy and verify loop, not a deploy and pray moment. Now I'll pass it to Joshua, who can talk about canary release via feature flag.
Yeah, thanks, Dewan. So Dewan was talking about at the like to sort of containerize the infrastructure, the actual application code itself, right? And that's very important, right? To ensure that your application, when it's deployed, doesn't cause any catastrophic failures with respect to your infrastructure. Can it handle the load? Does it compile? Does it run? And can you deploy it out to your user base, right? And can you do that successfully? But in addition to that, on top of that is the actual the application code itself, individual features inside of that application, right? So you can have a canary release of the features more than just, or sort of to give you sort of that more granular approach on top of the code that you're releasing, right? So you can roll out individual features based on certain attributes. Like you can roll out features to potentially like certain internal users, such as a QA team first, or to a country or to a beta cohort. I've seen situations in our customer base where, you may want to release a feature just to a certain individual customer and all of their users, things like that. So you have the ability to sort of slice and dice your user base to ensure that, features that are released, can be successful. And you can do that sort of without doing a new deployment. And so, combining these two, the canary of the application code and the canary of the features inside of your code itself, allows for a very, very powerful ability to kind of slice and dice and sort of pinpoint releasing your features and releasing your code in ways that can be successful. So next slide. So you can think, like I was saying a little bit before, you can think in two tracks, right? The canary deployment and the canary release, right? The concept of deploying infra and code versus releasing features. And one is at the infrastructure level versus at the application logic level. A canary deployment, thinking of deploying the code itself, usually isn't necessarily sort of user aware. So often it's just basically like a % of traffic, right? Or potentially, maybe one server has it and your other servers, your other containers don't. And so you're not necessarily able to do as like sort of as tightly or as sort of complex necessarily targeting rules. But in the application level layer, that's where you usually have more access to the context of the session. And you can do things like targeting user segments, like individual users, or potentially other attribute-based things, such as like individual customers or other various ways you can control traffic. And then sort of rolling back, there's two ways you can think about it, right? On the canary deployment, you can roll back the deployment, of course, kill the pod and redeploy your older pod, with like a blue-green deployment, or some of the other ways that Harness lets you do that. And of course, into our FME module, you can just flip the flag off when you're talking about a feature flag canary inside your application. And then, so conceptually then, what is progressive delivery, right? So progressive delivery is this controlled stage release of code and features to reduce risk and increase feedback. And why do you do this? You do this because it gives you those release control knobs, right? And so either if you're doing a canary at the sort of application infra level, or inside of the application or feature inside of your code level, or both, you want to sort of handle this sort of traffic percentage rollout curve, right? You want to start with a canary phase. Sometimes on the sort of app logic level, it can be just like a QA team. Or if you're just doing an infra or sort of deployment, maybe it's just like 1% of traffic, right? And then you test and monitor that, and you increase the rollout. And then when you're satisfied with like, hey, this isn't killing our metrics, this is successful, it's at least, not damaging any of sort of our guardrails, and it's, increasing the metrics that we wanted to increase, then we can do a full rollout. This example here is about a week, 6 days. We've seen longer or shorter ones depending. Usually a sort of deployment-based canary is usually shorter. 6 days is probably sort of some of the longer times I've seen. But if you're doing sort of a feature flag-based deployment, we've seen like, 2-week measuring periods not be sort of outlandish as far as like sort of standard based upon sort of the metrics that you can sort of collect, especially if you have a lot of traffic, you can get sort of a high powered result for your experiments in that way. So I think, yeah, so the next slide. All right, so here you can see kind of like a, or do you want to do this?
Sure. So this is what it looks like in practice. The architecture enables traffic splitting at the edge or load balancer level. Now your new version runs alongside the stable one, and you control who gets what. Now, I don't want you to like zoom into the text, because the idea is not for you to like read the individual text, but understand the flow. And it will be more evident when we actually show you the demo from both the application info level and within the app itself using feature flag. But the idea is your new version runs alongside the stable one, and then you control who gets what, as Joshua was mentioning, via service mesh, via ingress controllers, or native load balancing. Monitoring and observability are central. You need to track some sort of SLOs in near real time to make smart decisions. And you can layer on automated decision gates or approval steps between phases. This setup what makes progressive delivery safe, observable, and repeatable. As we say, that CI/CD gets you to prod, but progressive delivery makes sure that you survive prod. All right, so now time for demo. And the demo has two parts. So before we actually start the demo, so I'll focus on the application infrastructure side, delivering the software. We have an image and deploying that image using canary deployment. And then Joshua will focus on within the app using feature flag. All right, so let me play the video. So here I have a popular cloud native application called Pod Info, and we have a pipeline in Harness, which has a single stage canary deployment. And here I also have the YAML view. You don't need to read through the YAML, just shows you that you have both views, whether the pipeline view or the YAML view. And this is my Kubernetes manifest, the deployment YAML. And within the image, I'm specifying the V1 version. And what I have in my pipeline, a trigger. So that trigger triggers the pipeline if there is any push to the repository. So I made a commit. So now the pipeline is triggered. You can see my canary deploy stage is in progress. So at first, I am watching the pods in my namespace. So there will be one canary pod just to test the waters if my application runs smooth. So you can see now I have the pod info, and it has string canary to identify that this is a part of that canary deployment. The pod is still starting. Now you see the pod is running. So once this is successful, the canary delete will clear up that pod, and then it will roll out the primary deployments. So we're using HPA, the horizontal pod autoscaler, and we have declared like 3 instances in HPA. So now for my primary deployment, I'm expecting 3 pods to be there. So here I see there's already 1 pod running, and now the 2 other pods are in container creating state. And now I can see almost all 3 pods are running. So probably a few more seconds for the 2 pods, and now 3 of my pods are running. So now that my pods are running, what I want to do is I want to take a look at the application. So I'm going to port forward the application because I'm testing it locally. And then this application is running on port 9898, and I can see the application is running. What I want you to look at is the version. So here, the version is v653, and the text right above the ping, it says served by, and then the name of the pod. So now I can also validate that my pipeline has completed execution. My rolling deployment shows that the 3 replicas, they are available. So now I want to update my application and I want to roll out V2. So I'm changing the image in my deployment and I committed one more time. So this time I'm using a different image. Again, you can see that that change in my Git repository triggered the pipeline, and again, we'll go through the same stage. So at first, that port forward connection will break because the pods will be terminated and new pods will be starting. And here, I can see that the canary deployment and canary delete was already done. So it was too fast for us to see, and now the new pods for the primary deployment will be there. You can see the old pods are terminating and new pods are taking their place. Now these new pods, they're part of the updated deployment using the new image, the V2 image. And once the pods are up and running, I want to validate that. Okay, so now if I do a kubectl get deployment and I'm specifying the namespace, I can see that my pod info deployment, 4 pods because the old pod is also showing up in the count. And let's actually do a describe deployment. I want to see what's actually inside this deployment. So I'll specify the deployment name, which is pod info, and specify the namespace. I can see that in the image, it's using the newer image. So in the image, you'll see that it's Joshua's image. This is the latest image. And now I'll port forward again, and hopefully now the app is updated. Remember, the previous version was 653, and now you can see that the version is 680. But what's interesting is right above ping, you can see now a new text using key. So this is something Joshua added to the image he built. If there was any hiccups during this canary deployment, there will be automated rollback of this version, and Kubernetes deployment, Kubernetes rollback automatically would take care of this. You can see that the window of our canary deployment, because of this demo, these are a few seconds, but as Joshua was showing in his slides, the timeline could be different, whether you're using canary deployment as part of your application infrastructure or using feature flag, how long you want that canary phase to stay, that would be significant longer than just a few seconds as we're showing in this demo. All right, so now I'll pass it back to Joshua to show the second part of the demo, which is using application level feature flag.
Yeah, thanks, Dewan. Appreciate you showing off the sort of the CD portion of this demo, right? Continuous, the canary with the sort of CD deployment. So let's say that we're at the stage, well, I guess we'll start with a couple things. First, I want to take a look at that version that Dewan just deployed, and a couple things that are interesting about it. He mentioned the, so it's written in Go, but I'll talk a little bit about some of the code here. Hopefully you guys, folks on the call can see it. Let's see if I can make this a little bigger. Yeah. So a couple things about the code here. One thing is that this is a really simple sort of view front end that you saw. And there's a couple things here. First is that there is if there's a variable, it's using sort of like a very basic sort of injecting templating language here. So we're injecting a variable called canary enabled. And if the canary is enabled is true, it's going to say pong instead of ping. So you see here that it says ping. This is basically the version that he just deployed, but with no flag or flag being off. And you'll see additionally this sort of user key here. This is kind of simulate traffic to the page. like these are various sort of user IDs that are hitting this service. Like let's say you deployed a new service, right, to the general public, or to even your authenticated users. And so that's actually from here. That's also a sort of injected variable from the sort of info object in the templating language in Go. And where that's coming from is this canary enabled, what it's doing. So the user key is basically just a random number. But what's interesting is that the canary enabled, that's a feature flag. And so you can see right here that basically canary enabled defaults to false. So if there is no feature flag, it's deployed and it doesn't like sort of error or crash. It's just saying that, hey, there's no feature flag here. It's just going to default to false. It's going to be like the flag was off the whole time, right? And so then if the split SDK, the FME SDK, harness FME SDK is initialized, it's going to check for this user key for the flag pod info canary. And if the canary enabled is going to be set to true if the treatment is equal to on. And so that's going to allow us to essentially turn this flag on for like sort of a percentage-based rollout for users. And that's what we're going to see today. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the pipeline here. And so this is a pipeline for with sort of a combination of CD and a canary and CD, and also a canary with feature flags. In this, what I've done is essentially created a step for each of these, sort of creating the feature flag. This uses harness approvals as a gate, but you could do sort of anything you would like. You could potentially automate this. You could provide, you know, links or other various information to the person who's making the approval. In the sort of future, we'll have sort of automated feature flag approvals based on data, but we don't necessarily have that today. But conceptually, though, this still lets you, you know, review your feature flag and then automatically, or just approve it, and then have the feature flag automatically after the approval do the release. And in this pipeline, we have a release to 50%, a release to all users, and then there's also an approved to cleanup stage. When you do the approved to cleanup, I think at some point what you would probably expect is that after you clean it up, the feature would either be fully released, so you'd remove the flag from code, or what would happen is likely the feature is going to be turned off because you noticed something sort of incorrect about it. Maybe it damages your metrics. Maybe it sort of made a customer angry, things like that. So let's look at the, right here, we've got a pipeline that's sort of in the middle of running. And this is one where let's say we're at the point where we've done the CD, we've deployed this new version, but the feature is off, right? So you can see here, I've got my, my sort of Kubernetes deployment here with the three pods. I've got the application running here. It's simulating traffic with different user IDs, right? User key 208, 429. So this is like sort of, again, simulating traffic of various users hitting, right? And so then let's say I'm ready to approve. And so I'm ready to release this feature to 50% of my users. I've got, let's say I'm a product manager and I've got, you know, I want to see how this works. It's maybe low risk, right? 50% is a pretty high percentage to start with. So, you know, let's say it's a pretty low risk feature and I'm willing to say, let's release to 50% and just make sure it doesn't do any sort of serious damage. So I click approval. I could maybe add comments here if I want. I click OK. And then what it's going to do is it's going to basically run that 50% pipeline step. And what you're going to see after it runs is that sometimes this ping is going to say pong. You see that? So it changes to blue. And I didn't do a new deployment. I didn't change the code. The code is already there. It's been running for, you know, ever since Dewan did his part of the demo. But now, for some of these users, it changes to a blue pong button, right? Which is pretty cool, right? Didn't have to do any changes to deployments. This is just a decision within the application itself. And so let's say, you know what, this did a great job. I'm really happy with this feature. It's making our customers happy. And so everyone seems to like the pong button better than the ping button. So you click approve and you click approve, and then it's going to roll it out to everyone. And so now what you're going to see is that instead of only some users getting the red button, everyone's going to get blue. And so now let's say, well, this feature is great. We're going to release it to everyone. So we're going to, you know, clean up the flag. And so at this point, let's say, and you can have these approval stages going on for a while. I think you can have it actually for up to like maybe 52 weeks. So let's say you're approved to clean up, you removed it from code, and you're ready for this to be like sort of the new normal. You just click approve, and the flag is cleaned up. And so if you remove the flag again, like the application does, it's going to sort of act like the flag wasn't there at all. But anyway, pretty cool stuff. So I think we can go back to the slides now.
It was a there was a question. I think it's related to what you were showing, Joshua.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
How do you split traffic by % or specific segment of users?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you can split it via, so this pipeline actually has a template here that you can use, and you can look at. It's actually making an API call to Harness. And in here, it's just doing a 50-50. So you could change this percentage to sort of 10 or 5. And there's sort of more powerful usage of the APIs here as well that could also be used to make it so that you can do things like to different individual segments of users, or possibly even different different sort of attributed users, like users at a certain company or users with a certain sort of geography, things like that. So this is just a very simple example, but there's immense power in sort of the FME decisioning engine that is available.
Thanks, Joshua. And I'll put the slides on for you to do a recap.
Yeah, so progressive delivery is the combination of confidence and control. So the idea is that you want to deploy safely in production, right? You want real world testing without sort of real world consequences, right? You want to deploy safely in production, right? You don't want the issue of, you want to sort of limit the blast radius, right? You also want to decouple the release from deployment or deploy from release, right? This is the gold standard for feature flags in general, right? You can ship code and activate features independently, right? That's huge. That's a huge advantage of productivity. So you don't have to sort of tightly couple releasing code and then the feature is there for everyone. You can control that and sort of slice and dice who gets the feature. And with that lets you contain your potential impact, right? Precise targeting, reduce the blast radius of changes. Only deploy as much as as you're willing to roll back, right? And so the sort of speed that CI/CD and feature flag combined gives you, and that ability to roll back and roll forward, is instant risk mitigation, right? It's safety. It lets you one-click feature toggles to eliminate emergency deploys, and it gives you the ability for data-driven decisions, right? So you can let user behavior guide your full rollouts, right? You're not just guessing. You're not just seeing who complains, or as the experimentation expert Ron Kohavi would say, the hippo, or the highest paid person's opinion. No, you're actually making data-driven decisions about what features are successful or not. And I think that's really the way forward in today's economy.
I got to say, hippo, canary, there's a lot of animals involved in this webinar, and I did not expect that. Thank you so much, gentlemen. That was amazing. We appreciate your time. We do have some questions that did come up in the chat that I'm going to go ahead and ask you right now. So let's start with this first one. How do you decide between blue, green, canary, and rolling deployment strategies? And what factors should influence your choice?
All right, I can take on that one. So great question, and it's one that we get all the time. So the reality is there is no one size fits all. It comes down to the context. So your own risk tolerance, rollback needs, infrastructure, and how your app handles traffic. So let's walk through the main strategies, and we'll start with blue-green. So blue-green is when you need zero downtime and instant rollback. You're especially spinning up a clone of your environment. You validate the new version and then just flipping a switch for the traffic once you're confident. It's great for mission critical systems. So for example, your payment gateways or your login services, but keep in mind that it temporarily doubles your infrastructure footprint. The next one is canary, and canary deployment is perfect when you want to ease into deployment. You push the new version to a small subset of users or traffic first. You monitor the impact and then gradually ramp up if everything looks good. This is super helpful in catching like weird edge cases that you don't see in your dev environment, but you want to catch that in production. And then we have rolling deployments. So rolling deployments work well when you're deploying to a lot of instances, and then you can afford to update them in batches. It's less infra heavy than blue-green, but rollback can be trickier since different parts of your system may be running different versions mid-rollout. So the question is, how do you choose? Okay, so the summary is, if instant rollback is a must and you have got like some infrastructure to spare, you can go blue-green. If you want to de-risk gradually, then you can go canary deployment. And if you just need to update a fleet smoothly, then you can use rolling deployment.
Great. Thank you so much. We've got another one here that says, does introducing feature flags add latency or performance overhead? I think that's a great question. It's not something I considered. Does it do any of those things?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. That's a very common question. We get that from a lot of folks who are concerned about, making like sort of an API round trip call every time a flag is evaluated. And the good news is that from FME's perspective, our architecture is designed so that when a flag evaluation happens, it's actually hitting a local cache. So the FME SDK is actually, when they start up, they download all of the targeting rules to their internal cache. And so what that means is that when you're adding feature flags to an application, and that application has to hit that feature flag, let's say it's an API, hitting API requests, and you get like thousands of API requests per second. What that's going to do is that's just going to make that decision from its own internal memory of the API service. It's not going to have to, every time an incoming call happens, it's not going to have to make an API round trip to to our servers. So, it's a great question. The only thing you have to potentially be aware of based upon that is upon startup, you want to make sure that, long-lived services, when they start up, they download the cache with the SDK. And then from that point on, everything happens from within memory, and the cache is made up to date async. So, that's a fantastic question. And, it takes, ask questions about the architecture of your feature flags to ensure that they are not actually providing or increasing your latency every time there's a flag evaluation.
Thank you so much. Let's move on to another question we've got here. Can you explain the different ways to configure Canary deployment conditions and when you might choose one method over the other?
Yeah, for sure. So let me show my pipeline. So if you can see the screen, you're seeing the Canary deployment stage within my pipeline. And here you have, I'm hovering my mouse over that, you have either the instance count or the percentage count. So these are the two options you can choose from. And while I'm showing this, I want to quickly show you the SCM or the code repository I used during my demo is actually Harness code repository. So if you haven't used it, think of it as like enterprise grade security compliant code repository. So coming back to the question, so instances and percentage. So these are the two main knobs. So with percentage-based Canary, so this is when you can say deploy 10% of the replicas. So if your application scales up or down dynamically, say with horizontal pod scaling, which we used in one of our Kubernetes manifest, then this method adapts automatically. So if you have 10 pods now and one gets the Canary, if you scale to 20, then 2 pod gets the Canary. So this is super helpful when your system load fluctuates and you want to the Canary to keep up with that. But then instance-based Canary gives you exact control. So this is instance count, and you can say always deploy 2 pods. This is really handy when you're working on a fixed size environment or you need predictable footprint for things like testing SLAs, resource constraints, or dealing with older or more rigid systems. So how do you decide which one? So you can go with percentage when your application is elastic, traffic based, or you're trying to roll out slowly as user traffic ramps up. Use instance count when you need precision and when scaling isn't part of your equation. To sum up, percentage gives you adaptive rollout, and instance count gives you surgical control. You can choose based on how much flexibility and predictability your system needs during deployment.
Fantastic. We've got one more question that came through. How do you ensure the feature flag service itself doesn't become a single point of failure?
Yeah, this is actually really, really important. So if we're able to go back and share my screen, we can see right here something that I mentioned briefly in when it was my time to do the demo, but I think it's worth reiterating here, is that you can see here that this canary enabled variable, which is what represents if the flag is on or off, is initialized and can exist without the flag even sort of being evaluated at all. And it's really important to code defensively like this when you're using feature flags. If your feature flag service isn't available, your application should treat it as if the feature flag is off, or potentially if it's on based upon sort of how you handle defaulting. But it should never be the case that if the feature flag service is unavailable or your feature flag service is down for whatever reason, or it's unable to connect, like there's a sort of a network issue or something like that, it should never cause your application to be down, your application to crash. You should always be coding defensively around that and treating it as, if the feature flag service or SDK can't initialize or isn't initialized, that your feature is off. And so that's something that's really important to handle when you are writing performance or production grade applications that use feature flags.
Thank you so much for that, Josh. That was our last question of the day. But of course, for those watching, if one comes up, please put it in the chat. We'll make sure that somebody reaches out to you to get that information to you. For now, though, if you'd like to learn more, you could check out the information on your screen that you see here. Just making sure in case anybody's listening passively in the background, could you say the website out loud, Dewan or Josh, for them to go visit?
Yeah, for sure. The website is harness.io. And then you can find the demo link there. We thank you for joining this. And Captain Canary will appreciate if you could take 5 seconds. It is really like 3 questions, 5 seconds to fill out the feedback form. This helps us improve our content and delivery, how we can improve future sessions with you. And yes, we hugely appreciate your time today.
And thank you to Captain Canary for being the unofficial 4th member of this webinar today. And of course, thank you, Josh and Dewan, for joining me. Thank you at home for watching and listening to today's presentation. We hope you found it valuable and informative. Of course, if you have any further questions and would like more information, please don't hesitate to reach out to Josh, Dewan, and the team at Harness. Once again, I'm Katie Bavoso. Thank you so much for joining us at D-Zone and Harness today. Have a great rest of your day.